Well, greetings and salutations, everyone. I hope everyone is doing well still, and welcome to, depending on wherever you may live or however you may look at your clock, this early morning or middle of the night bonus upload. Before we jump into it, a couple links. As many of you know, I rely on Patreon, PayPal, channel membership, and the merch to help the channel to continue to grow and go. Links to Patreon, PayPal, and channel membership is in the description below. Merch displayed directly under the video. Also, Dogman Frightening Encounters, Volume 1 through 3, the audiobook versions. They were written and researched by Tom Lyons, narrated and produced by me, Jeff Nadolny. Those audiobooks are available on Audible, Amazon, and iTunes, links to which are also in the description as well. And finally, last but definitely not least, if you'd really like to help support the channel to continue to grow and go, simply subscribe. It doesn't cost you a cent. Click the like button, takes half a second. If you don't want to miss out on any of the informative uploads I put out daily, click that bell icon, and folks, please leave a comment. Why? Well, because all these things really do help the channel to continue to grow and go. And yes, folks, they definitely do matter. Now, everyone, I have taken far too much of your time. Let's jump in to this middle of the night or early morning bonus upload, shall we? Hello, Jeffrey. Well, let's start this off from the very beginning. My dad worked for the agency for 30 years and 1 month to the day and retired at the ripe age of 62. And would have loved to have done another 10 years, but he said he was getting too slow, and at the time I didn't understand, but now I do. I was born April of 1960 and was the youngest in my family. My dad was my idol. I worshipped the ground he walked on. He had already taught me at a very early age gun safety and how to clean what animals I killed and to take them for food for the table. I took my first whitetail at the age of 8 and dressed it myself, and a friend of my dad's that I was hunting with helped me to get it out and to the processor. Then at the age of 12, I took my first black bear, and it just so happens my dad was home for this hunt, and he was so proud. We skinned it up together and packed it up. He helped me carry it far more than I was able to carry it, but we got it out in one trip. Then, seeing my dad became much fewer and far less often than the family liked. My schooling ended and rolled around, and my mother did everything in her power to get Dad home for my graduation. But it was a truly busy time for him, and what I would later learn, when they call you must go, and go then. It was June of 1978, and my mother was telling him she needed to talk to him about my plans about life, since he was unwilling to help me get a job like his. He was all for me getting a state-level game warden job, but not what he was doing. She got a message to him through his boss that I was wanting to join the military, and he sent word home to my oldest sister that would be just fine. So the next day I went and signed up for the United States Marines. 12 days later, I was at Parris Island in boot camp. Man, was it hard, but I made it, and I was in pretty good shape when I went in. After boot camp, no one would have messed with me. 6'4", 228 of muscle. And everyone in the family came to my graduation except my dad. What a letdown. He finally called and talked with me and tried to explain that he was working a case and couldn't get away, and said he was sorry, but someday he'd make it up. That day never came around in my eyes. Years roll by, and it's August of 1985, and it's time for me to re-up my papers, and Dad's retiring. So I call a close friend of his in Georgia and ask him to help me get my dad's job, and he agrees to help. His name is George Cruz, actual name, long time dead and buried now. We filled out the paperwork, and bam, the agency jumps all over it like a dog on a bone. Told me that they would make the announcement at his ceremony closing. I told them he was not going to like it one bit, and they asked me if I was my own man or if my dad made my decisions for me. and I answered them that I made my own decisions. Last day of August in 1985, we all attended his ceremony for his retirement, and they really put it's on for him. I was super proud of my old man that day, and all he had done in his time with the agency. Then they told him that they had one more surprise for him and asked me to please come forward and stand beside him for a couple of minutes, so they could get everything in order. And I do as I was told and take my place beside him. We're talking back and forth, and the speaker starts to talk again, and he asks my dad who would be a good replacement for him. My dad starts to think about some of the recruits, then realizes it was me who was going to replace him, and you could tell he was not happy. He then asks to speak to the commander and asks one more favor, that they don't hire me for that position, but it was denied. This brings us up to September of 1985, and they take me in the office area and show me where my desk will be. It's my old man's. Then into a file room, and there are rows and rows of files, and they tell me to pull any file I like and sit and read it completely. Don't put it back till I've read it all and looked at the pictures, if there are any that are drawing, which they know there will be some. Also, to write down the file number and take good notes on the file because I would be quizzed on it later. I opened the file and actually smiled and chuckled a little when I started to read, and the agent in the room asked what was so funny. And I replied, "You expect me to believe what I'm reading is to be true and correct. My dad would have told me long ago if something like this existed and would have never let me go into the woods when I was 7 years old. He told me to finish that file and to be ready to take a test on it the following morning, and to take it to my quarters so I will know it inside and out. So I study it just like I was back in school. When I went to my room for the night, I called my dad, and he said one thing, how much of this is true, and he told me that every one of those files holds real cases, and this is what he has been doing for the last 30 years of his life. The next day I go in and ace the test, and the agent says, I see you talked with your dad and have taken this all to heart. He said you would be ready to go into the field in 1 week, so we will find out soon enough. So there are 3 more agents come in and tell me it's field trip time, but I can't see the first part of the trip. So they blindfold me and then handcuff me. And I ask what this is for, and they explain for my safety, and we all laugh. We start walking, and it's like we walk for 2, maybe 3 miles, and I can hear them speaking to other people, and them speaking back, and speaking to me very politely. Then we come to what I assume is an elevator, and we go down for maybe 3 or 4 minutes. By this time, I'm starting to get a little unnerved and asking questions, only getting about half of them answered. But I'm still hearing other people talking, but we have walked another mile, maybe, and it's all dirt. And now it's grown silent, and there's a smell of fresh hay and animal smell that I can't put my finger on. They begin talking to me and say they are going to reposition the cuffs, if that's okay, and want me to step up with them onto a platform that is in front of us, and I say okay. At this point, they are telling me that there is nothing to worry about. It's standard protocol for this to be done to every agent. Says it tests their smell and their hearing. So me and 2 more agents step up onto this platform, and they move my hands out to the sides and put cuffs on both hands. Then I step forward just a little and bump what feels like a plate glass window. One of the agents asks what I feel, and I lean my head forward and put my head against a piece of glass that feels like it has holes in it. There's something like that. Other agents ask what I hear, and everything goes very quiet. but I can hear a faint noise. Sounds like something stepping ever so softly towards my location. They explained to me to take note of my surroundings and listen and take in the odors and tell them what they are. And I say that I know I smell fresh hay. I can smell some sort of animal, but not sure if that is correct or not. Could be some type of foliage. Then, without them saying anything, something came up to the glass where I was standing, but on the other side of the glass, and was breathing heavy enough for me to hear it. I smell it, and I realized that I was probably in a bad way at that very moment. Then I heard movement from behind, and it sounded just like what I had heard walk up to me from in front, and I knew I didn't have any glass behind me, and I wasn't about to say anything at that very moment. Then the movement from the rear stopped, and a blindfold was removed, and looking me dead in my eyes was an 8-foot 2-inch werewolf that was their breeding male that was captured in Louisiana, and this thing let out a roar and went beating and pounding on the glass in front of me. I was so close, and it was so loud that my ears bled from the volume that came from this creature, and went on for a good 6 or 7 minutes solid. Then I was introduced to the werewolf. Its name is Sebastian. It's nearly black in color, except its face is now showing gray on its face, for the most part of it. I was then released, and I continued to talk to the creature, and it almost acted like it understood what I was saying. One of the agents said it did understand the majority of what I said to it, and said that if they were to leave me alone, it would continue to talk to me, and that it would finally get what I was trying to say, and that it would quit showing aggressive behavior towards me, because I had shown none towards it while it was trying to scare me. There was no use in showing me any. I couldn't run or do anything to get away from it at that time. All this was going on, so I just stood as still as possible and hoped it hushed soon. They then showed me what type of creature I had been chosen to deal with, which is my specialty. Was going to be the werewolf, followed by the Dogman, and then the Bigfoot. For the next 10 days, I spent reading more encounters and sitting, learning their paperwork system and visiting downstairs and the creatures I would learn to hunt and track, to learn their smell and to know how each one felt like, so I could tell the difference in the dark, which, believe it or not, would come in handy at future time for me. All this was taught to me by a man much older than myself and was retiring in about 3 more weeks. He said that our field training was coming up the next day and that they issued me all my gear and traveling pack. My main piece of gear back then was a .45 caliber handgun and 2 days at the range and reloading bench to develop a load for my weapon and my weapon alone. Then we received a call. It came from the game warden service in Maine. This was to be my first ever call. I grabbed my clothes and my belongings and headed to the office. I met my trainer at the office about 20 minutes, and our commander was there. He sat me down and told me that I would have help on this one, and to listen close to how Scott took care of everything, and to watch and let him take the lead, and not to get into any trouble. He explained to Scott the same things, and then they spoke privately, like he was giving him special orders or something, and I could say that I actually didn't like the way it went down. They came out of the office, and the commander says, "Happy hunting, stay safe, and we'll see you soon." Then we left out of the back, loaded up onto a helicopter, and headed to Maine. Scott told me this was my hunt, and that he was just along for the ride, and that we would arrive after daylight, and we would have a vehicle waiting on us at the landing point, and that we would go into town first and talk with the victim's family, as they were being held at the jail, and the victim was still in the woods with several officers around him, making sure nothing bothered the body till we got there. Scott and myself both dozed off and woke up to a beautiful sunrise. So we get in the SUV and Scott's driving and we go to the sheriff's office. And they are not there, but at a nearby bed and breakfast. So while they go to get them, we go and get us some breakfast, and Scott has turned sick and calls the office and reports that he is sick and I'm on my own. I go back to the sheriff's office, set up in a room, and start to interview the family members one by one. I chose to interview the youngest. First, his name was Abel. Abel is 14 years old, and I explained to him what I was there to do, and asked what I needed from him to help me out if there was able to do that. He answered in a quiet voice and said he would try, and I asked him if he wanted anybody else in the room, and he declined. I told him that I would do it better if he could. I go back to the sheriff's office, set up in a room, and start to interview the family members one by one. I chose to interview the youngest first. His name is Abel. Abel's 14 years old, and I explained to him why I was there and what I was doing, and asked what I needed from him to do to help me out. If he wanted someone in the room with him, that it would be okay. But he declined if I thought it would be better. I told him it would be better if he could. I said, I will make it real easy on you, Abel. Just tell me what you heard and what you saw on that night we're talking about. Just take your time, think about what you're going to say, and then say it. So let's start with what you heard. Think for a minute and then answer, okay? He replied, sure. He sat silently for maybe a minute and a half, then spoke really softly again. He raised his head and looked me straight in my eyes and asked if I had ever watched a werewolf movie. I answered and said, yes, I have. Is that what it sounded like? He spoke again, a little more determined this time, and said, yes, a wolf. I said, this must have scared you, and he replied, no, not really. I had my dad and 2 older brothers with me, so I wasn't really scared. I said, that's good. You should enjoy the outdoors as much as possible, and always remember, this is a freak thing that has happened, okay? He said, okay, but I could tell it didn't help much to a 14-year-old. I then said, one more question for you, and me and you will be all done, okay? What did you see when you saw this animal? We were all laughing and joking about the howling going on, and things got really quiet, like the bugs quit making any noise, and my dad and oldest brother got out their pistols just in case it was a bear, or, as my dad said, a predator of some sorts. We can hear it walking around our camp, and it sounds like it's getting closer and then further away, and then it will howl some more, and then walk some more. Then, without warning, my dad lets loose a shot into the air into the direction it sounds like it was from us. And you can hear this thing take off running and making an awful noise, but it doesn't sound like it's breaking brush, like it's running and can see where it's running and not running into things. And it's getting closer and closer. He yells at me and David to get into the tent and tells Johnny to get to the far side of the tent, and if he gets an open shot, take it. It keeps running for what sounds like 2 minutes, then silence. We can see our dad at the far side of the fire, and he asks Johnny, do you see anything? And he replies, no. Johnny said, I think it left the area, and him and my dad start toward the fire. My dad was closer to the fire and had just arrived when we all heard gurgling and looked at Johnny, and this thing was standing maybe 10 foot in front of the tent holding him up in the air with blood pouring out of his neck. Its face is covered in my brother's blood. My dad froze, and myself and my brother jumped inside of the tent. Dad dropped to his knees. I just knew he would be next. but what felt like hours was probably only minutes at the most. It dropped Johnny, turned and looked at me and David. Took a couple of steps in our direction. It had a flat face, looked like a man except covered in all hair, maybe 9 feet tall and covered in blood. Finally it turned and stared at our dad. He was still on his knees and no longer had a gun in his hand. This thing walked within 3 feet of him and could have killed him just as easy as my brother. We tried to get my dad to leave, but he would not even speak to us, so all we knew to do was to go back into the tent and curl up together and wait till morning. David did get Johnny's handgun, and we didn't get much sleep, but we did get a little. The next morning, we had no idea which way to go, but there was 3 ladies that happened our way and found and seen what had taken place. It took me and my brother the 6 miles back to the regular campground and got the help that we needed to come get our dad out of the woods and take care of our brother for us. I said, well, that's all good what they did. Are they taking care of you all well, getting you fed and everything? He said yes. I then asked, do you have any questions for me? He wanted to know what my job was and what I would be doing. I then explained that I would be here to help him and his family get through this difficult time and see that his dad got the care he needed, and that I would take care of what hurt his brother the way it did. He then said, you better just let that thing go. I didn't explain that part very well to the young man, but I have gotten better since then, and that was the first time. Next up was David. He was more cocky from the get-go. He was slightly older than Abel. David was 17 and wanted to know before he answered any questions why he and any of his family were not being allowed to call home. I explained that since it was an animal attack, that duty fell on the sheriff, and that he had already notified their family, and that his mother and his aunt and uncle were driving out to pick the 3 of them up and make arrangements for Johnny's body. I was straightforward with him, and it shook this young man to his very core. He then asks about his dad, why he froze like he did, and not moved into action to try to save his son and his brother. He was calling his dad a coward for not acting and trying to save his brother. I explained different people handle stress in different ways, and that your dad didn't react very well at all, and that he acted like most people would react to seeing one of these creatures. But that didn't make him a coward, and his dad needed all the support and love he could give him right now. He sat there for a few minutes, and I then asked him if he had anything else he would like to ask, and he said maybe in a few minutes. And I told him that would be okay, and asked him if he could help me out by answering some questions now. He said he would try, but that Abel was probably the clearest-headed one about all of this. I replied, just answer the best you can. So Abel described the creature to me as having a long snout. Is this true or false? He said that's false. He was closer to it than I was, and we even talked about it in the tent after it left, making sure we had seen the same thing. It had a flat face. I said that's okay. That's what he said. I just needed to make sure you were both on the same page about what you saw. He kind of giggled and said trick questions, and I promised there would be no more questions that I would try to trick him with. I then said, when the creature stood in front of you, Abel, and your dad, and was holding your brother's body up in the air, was its arms fully extended? He told me he was not sure, but that his brother's head had fallen back and was above the creature's head, and it held him for a while, maybe 2 or 3 minutes before it dropped him. I then asked what it was holding him by, and he replied what was left of his neck, and he was holding it in his right hand. I had not mentioned the right hand at this time, but all werewolves are right-handed dominant. So he brought this up and answered before I was able to ask my next question. Then it turned and walked towards your dad. Did your dad ever look up at it and just continue to look at the ground the whole time? He never once looked at it, and all this time his pistol was lying on the ground in front of him. I told him I was glad that his dad didn't reach for it, and this upset David again, and I knew I was close to having to end this part of the interview, as he was not coping well with what happened, and asked him if he would like to speak with a professional to help him with his emotions, and he accepted them gladly. I forgot to add that I asked this to Abel also, and he said he would speak with his mom, but he thought it would be a good idea. I then told David he was going to be fine and not let this discourage about spending his time in the woods, that these things are so rare happening that chances are he will never see another one in his entire life. And that's when these things happen. Something has happened with the creature to cause it to act this way. This is not normal behavior for one of them. So now it's Daddy Gene's time, and I can hear him, and I'm all the way in the back, and someone spilled the beans. His son Johnny is still lying out in the woods, waiting on me to complete my interviews. And this is just going to make it even harder. I take like a 10-minute break, hoping he will calm down, and I even consider not even interviewing him the way he was acting, and just head out into the field and start doing what I need to do there and start hunting. The two boys have already told me what I'm going to be hunting, and it has taken a human life, which means that it has to die, or I must die trying to kill it. That's just how it plays out. I call and check on Scott, and he sounds like he got worse instead of better, and tells me I need to do the interview with the dad and then go for the hunt. And if he gets any better, he will join me as quick as he can. I enter the room, and he starts cussing and raising hell and telling me what I need to do and how I need to do it. And the sheriff is standing there trying to get him to sit down, and nothing is working. And you have to remember that I'm a big boy, but this fella Gene is quite a bit taller than me, and probably weighs the same as me. Everything is okay till I sit down and tell him I have some questions that must be answered before I can go into the field. Then he snaps, shoves the sheriff, and comes after me like a raging bull of some sort. And just as soon as he gets in striking distance, I put him on the floor. 2 or 3 or maybe more deputies rush in and cuff him and check on the sheriff, who is probably 65 years old, at least. Sits him at the table, and I start my questions, and he will not answer me. So I tell Gene I have days to sit here before I have to see his son Johnny, and this breaks him down to crying and me getting the answers. Makes me feel like a dirty bastard to have to break him down this way, but it works. I need from him, which is not very much at all, just mostly verifying what the boys had already told me. Always go to your youngest witnesses first. They will tell you the truth before the older ones will. The older people like to interject themselves into the investigations, so they will sound important or have a role in it. He did tell me one thing that stood out to me. He said that he can look at things and tell you how tall they are, and told me this werewolf would be 8 foot 7 inches tall, and it was the tallest one I had ever dealt in my career at that very first one. After we finally had him calmed down enough, I offered him help and told him that I had offered it to his boys, and that they both wanted it. He also accepted. He and they were sent to the nearest naval hospital base, to their home, and stayed in their programs, and all three completed their program, and the youngest still to this day contacts me every year around the holidays and checks up on me. We don't talk about what happened anymore. He just asks how close is retirement and that he knows where I can get a good doctor. Round Pond Public Land, Ashland, Maine, 04732. 20,000 acres of public land set aside. You can read about the park online. Nothing about this attack will you find anywhere. September 24th, 1985. My first hunt was supposed to be with my trainer, Scott. My trainer is sick and cannot go into the field after I complete the interviews. It's now around 1100 hours. I have just spoke with Scott by phone again, and he states no way can he go into the field with me, as he is far too sick and would cause more damage than good if he went. He says I have the know-how to get the job done. Just make sure to take my time and don't make a mistake with what I've been taught. I call into the office and speak with the commander and let him know what has happened with Scott and asked how to proceed. He explained to me that most times when an agent is sent into the field, as long as the odds are not worse than 3 to 1, we go alone, unless other agents are just sitting doing nothing. And I remind him that I have not completed my training and have no field training whatsoever except for being told what to do and what not to do. I'm then informed that all the other agents are out on other calls at this time, and he cannot call one in to help me at this time, and I must move ahead with my hunt. I then disconnect my call home to my wife, and tell her I will see her in a few days. And she is all excited that I will be back in Georgia in a few days. So now I get the sheriff to lead me out to the location where this took place, and the campground is empty. They decided it would be better to send all the campers away till this was all resolved. There are several sheriff cars in the parking lot and one older ambulance. I put on my pack and we start our hike the 6 miles to where the body is now being protected by the deputies. He is questioning me the whole way out there about this creature and how it came to be in his area. I told him as much at the time as I felt comfortable telling him, and he was very receiving of what I was telling him. He didn't understand how it was going to be swept under the rug as a bear attack with the kids seeing what they saw and what the dad saw, but that's the reasons they were sent to the naval hospital for help, to erase the memory of what they had seen and replace with an image of something else, as in a bear. So we arrive at the body, and they had a low tent over it. It's not 6 miles back into the woods. It might have been 2.5 back. I have them take the tent down. The body is covered by sheets, 3 to be exact. Not much blood coming through the top sheet. As I'm looking around, I step behind the tents that they were going to sleep in. I find the spot of the attack, and where he had lost 75% of his blood. And the sheriff and his men have not seen this yet, and the crime scene has all been taken care of, and the photos have been taken supposedly. When I pointed this out, 5 of the 8 deputies lost their breakfast. Nearby, it was a brutal scene. So I'm talking into the handheld cassette recorder, taking my notes and telling these deputies what needs to be done. And the sheriff is giving me no grief over ordering his men around. I ask for them to get the one who takes their photos back up, and let's finish up this scene before we lose any more daylight. Another deputy shows up with a camera, and it's now 1500 hours, and we pull the sheets off of the body. Starting at the feet, I asked anyone with weak stomachs to please move away because this is going to be the worst thing any of them has ever seen. I now have 2 left with me, and they were the first 2 on the scene. So they have already seen the body and know what to expect. They covered it up and are telling me, as I uncover the body, where the wounds will begin. I've not seen a body other than pictures that have been killed by these creatures at this time, so I'm not really sure what to expect, but I know I can't let myself look weak in front of all of these people. So I'm taking my time rolling these sheets up and starting to see some blood on his clothing. That has not came through the sheets. At this point, the 2 deputies suggest to let them get on each side, and they slowly roll up the sheets, and this is the plan we go with. Finally, we are all at his chest, and most were standing far enough away they can't see the body. And one of them says, "Get ready, it starts here." They lift it up where I can see, and what I saw didn't even look like a human being. The rip started about center of his chest, when straight up all the way through the very top of his head, and you could tell it was in one fluid motion. All the cuts were at least 2.5 inches deep. Could have been more. There was one side motion rip across his neck that was deeper than the upper rip that made his head fall back. His vertebrae was showing. There was nothing anyone could have done to save this young man from this creature. I now had all the pictures that I needed. This creature killed him for sport and rubbed his face in his victim's neck just to get the blood all over his face. There was no bite wounds on the body, but the boys both said that its face was covered in blood. After he was covered back up, he was placed into a body bag, and the long walk out with all the rest of the processions of the family and the cleanup of the area was walking out. I spoke with the sheriff and let him know that I would greatly appreciate it if someone would take my rental back and leave it with Scott, and he agreed. He also told me that they intended to lock the gates on the way out, and I said that would be fine. His last words to me is that I must be nuts. So we parted ways, and I checked the area more closely now and found that the creature came back during the night while they were guarding the body. Now, knowing that it was coming back to the area of its kill, I made my plan. They had come in an opening maybe 20 feet square, so I went to work as fast as I could. I seen a lot of swans on my way in at the lake, so I doubled back, started to feed them, and sure enough, I was able to get one close enough to throw a ground cover over it and catch it. My plan was to take it to the opening and after dark build a small fire and tie out the swan and wait for the creature to make its move. I got everything ready, and dark came. I built the fire and tied the swan out on the middle of the opening, and I moved into the brush and waited. Several times I heard a large bipedal animal moving, but no sounds to truly identify it. Daylight comes, and the swan is quit as all get, just like it was all night, but I finally come out of my place in the woods and check my surroundings. It's bright, beautiful, sunshine-filled day. I'm walking by the area that is soaked with Johnny's blood and look down at it, and shit, the creature has been there and laid down in the spot and rolled like a dog. I'm able to follow its tracks for almost a mile, and then just nothing like it vanished into thin air. I pulled out my phone and I called my dad, first person I can think to call. His first suggestion is to check the trees. Said they will climb and sit and wait for you to pass. So I hang up and check my surroundings and head back. I call Scott and tell him what has happened, and he says these things are smart. You just have to be smarter, and if it got that close, it feels it is smarter than you are. It will be back. You are in the right place, and it will try to take your decoy sooner than later, just to prove to you that it is smarter. I ask how he's feeling, and the truth came out about something else. That meeting he had with the commander was for him to act sick and for me to go in it alone, to see if I could cut it or not. He refused my dad's request not to hire me, but he told him he would not make it easy on me. But now Scott felt like I could be in more danger than anyone had thought. He was going to call the office and report that was going on and see if he could join me at this point in time, and that he would call me back shortly. His last words to me then was to find me a wide open spot and sit still till I heard from him. So I moved to another opening, maybe 75 yards from the spot that was almost 40 yards square, and I got right in the middle of it and was just sitting in the sun waiting for my phone to ring. I don't know how long it had been. The sun was still up in the sky, and I know I had fallen asleep at some point. But the swan started making all kinds of noises, and I decided to check on it. But I decided to go a different path than the one I had come over here on. It was much thicker and much more cover than the one I came in on. As I made my way towards the noise of the swan, it stopped making noise. I stopped in my tracks and waited and listened, but couldn't hear the swan anymore. So I figured it was just carrying on about something, but I also knew that these creatures were not only creatures of the night. This coming into mind, I readied my rifle and sidearm just in case and start to move forward. My heart is beating out of my chest at this point. And I haven't even seen anything to make me feel this way yet. But there I was inching forward, my rifle at the ready, looking for any sign of movement, thinking why didn't I go another way around to the area I now needed to be in, and why was my heart beating out of control? I'd been sent on a mission in the military and had to kill. Was this going to be any different? The only thing I could think of was these things were a lot closer than my other targets, and they had ways of taking me out that I knew was going to hurt like hell. My hands were sweating. I had sweat all over me. Then I heard it. It was smelling the air. It was come to mind, and I was locked and loaded. But where was it coming from? I couldn't see it anywhere. All the noises I was hearing were coming from in front of me, or were they coming from behind me? I was questioning everything. Everything was running through my mind at this point. Then silence, nothing. Maybe it left the area, or was out of hearing distance. I don't know. But I was not moving right then to find out. I didn't move for more than an hour. My legs were getting Charlie horses in both of them, and I knew I was going to have to move. The sun was getting lower in the sky, and I didn't like my position. My gun was waist high, and I took one step, and I heard a footfall, and I then knew it was still in front of me, but where? I couldn't see it. I rolled my wrist to see my watch. It was 625 hours, and it was time to get out of where I was standing at. I was not in a good way. Move forward or move back, I had two options, and as in the Marine Corps, we always move forward. So I took in a deep breath and took another step, and what a relief, to my legs, but there was also another footfall when I had did this, and still no visual of what was making them. Two more rapid steps forward and left a little, and one more footfall, and still no visual. But I believe I'm zeroing in on the noise. Then another 5 fast steps straight ahead, and I see a patch of black fur moving to my left and in front of me, maybe 25 yards ahead of me. I have a visual of something, just not sure yet of what it is. It's not moving unless I'm moving, so before it gets any darker, I start to walk to my left, trying to get to the small opening. And then I realize it's going to cut me off before we get there. We are now maybe 18 yards apart. Not a clear shot, even with my 4.58 that I have. When I hit this thing, I don't have a chance of getting back up. I then speak to it very calmly and ask if it would return to Virginia with me, and that I understand that mistakes happen and it can be fixed. I wait a brief minute, maybe two, standing there watching what was it going to do, to see what its body language was telling me, or if it was going to answer me. But instead, I got a very low, intense growl and started to grow in intensely, and by the end of the minute, its head was tilted back into a full outright howl that sent chills down my spine. And all I could think was I better not miss when he charges, and he is going to charge me now, and it's going to be any minute now. He was ducking his head, looking at me and snarling and carrying on. He knew I was there to kill him, or to be killed, and the fight was here and now. I had given him a way out, but he had refused his freedom, more important than his life, unless he could take mine. Even if he did take mine, there would be others that would come after him, and he knew that, so he chooses to make his stand here and now. I had put another 7 or 8 yards between us now and got myself on leveler ground, and was still speaking to the creature in a calm voice, rifle almost at shoulder height and ready. I was at the ready as I could be, no shakes, nothing. He is a hell of a specimen, bigger than our breeding male, by at least a half a foot. I'm guessing he's 8'2" tall. Finally, I'm tired of talking, and he gets this look on his face, and I think to myself, he is going to run away. Do I just shoot him? That is what I'm supposed to do anyway. He was killed a human, and that is what we do. Just as I finish that thought, he answers my question and charges me as fast as he can. And if I had not been so close to ready with the rifle, he may have won. But when that wind mag hit him, I hit him in the chin, he hit the ground, and he just laid there. I bolted another round in the chamber. I was shaking and then walked over to him, and he looked up at me. His eyes were sad, and he knew he had lost the battle. I sat down just out of arm's reach while he died. It wasn't that long, maybe 2 minutes. He wasn't struggling for air. He was just lying there, very peaceful. He'd been jerking or gasping for air. I would have done the right thing and put another round in him. I walked out to the phone in the campground and made all the calls and got the people there, and we picked the creature up. He was, like Gene had said, 8'7", and weighed 470 pounds. And this was my first hunt and my first werewolf kill. And it's also my biggest werewolf that I have ever killed since I have been doing this. We flew this one to Virginia. This was before the release, so there were no ear number, and as Scott returned, he was able to retire. I was never given any field training, so I've been self-taught as far as all of this goes. Well, there you have it, folks. I hope you all enjoyed this bonus upload as much as I enjoyed sharing it with you. I'd like to thank you all for supporting the channel. It is, after all, your support that keeps the channel growing and going. And honestly,
what gives people a chance and a place to share their experiences and theories judgment-free, just simply treated with the respect that they deserve. Everyone, please stay safe, happy, healthy, and ever vigilant, keeping an eye on our children, pets, family, and friends. These creatures are real, they are out there and dangerous. Share this information with those you love and care about, and it may just help save their lives someday. Until next time, never stop asking questions, never stop searching for answers, and God bless.